Okay. Okay, so we'll start with Gasho just to get going here. Namami Dautsu, Namami Da, Namami Da. Okay. Um, yeah, one announcement I wanted to make, and I wanted to put on the recording for Greg's sake, is at the end of September, the International Association of Shin Buddhist Studies is having a conference in Kyoto hosted by Ryukoku University. Um, I don't know if either you are in a position to go at that time. Greg he travels to Japan different times, so I'm just announcing in case it coincides with the time he's in Japan. But the IASBS for me has been really important. They meet. They usually used to meet every 2 years. They haven't met for quite a while in person, but it's primarily an academic conference, but because it's Jodo Shinshu, they always had a um, custom of inviting ministers and even lay people to participate to do presentations. So the presentations have a wide range of from super academic, nitpicking to some very accessible ones about culture and how things are going at temples and stuff. So and usually they're well attended by ministers from all over the world. They're invited from Europe and North and South America, as well as in Hawaii, as well as all over Japan. So, and they have sessions some are purely in English with Japanese translation, some are Japanese with or without English translation, depending on the topic and the venue. But it's an activity that's really been important for me since I graduated from Otani to keep in touch with scholars. And it's one of the few events where Nishi and Higashi are pretty equal on equal footing. And so and they really do go out of their way to make sure enough Higashi people are there to present papers and be represented. So it's a nice event like that. So um, if you're interested, I could send you the link. But right now they're just announcing the schedule and the call for papers. I'm not going to present a paper. I used to do it almost every time, but I'd like to just go as a participant. I mean, as an audience this time. Let the young people present the papers is what I feel. Um, so today we're going to try to cover this material on the larger sutra, and they really pick up a lot of different topics on the larger sutra. So I really doubt we're going to get through the whole thing in an hour. We might have to save some for the next meeting. But as you both know, larger sutra is very important, especially for Shinran. And I think Victor knows, he was attending my larger sutra study session, that my view of the larger sutra is very much influenced by Akirasu, because um, his viewpoint, and particularly an essay he wrote about Shinran, that for him personally, Akirasu, I think one of the titles is from Tani Sho, the larger sutra, and I think Dr. Netta has uh, translated some excerpts, but mostly I rely on a translation that was done ages ago, like in the 30s. um, but he actually put out a little pamphlet, and Reverend Kubose at our temple, and I think other ministers passed it out to their Japanese speaking people. So I found it in my grandmother's stuff when she passed away, and as I've been receiving books, Japanese books from temple members who passed away, I also find that pamphlet as well. But Akarasu's point is, for him personally, he thought the Tani Sho was it. He thought that Tani Sho, since Kyozawa talked about it, was the main text to guide his life. But when he had the terrible scandal broke out and his name became mud, um, he kind of retreated from the public life. And he realized after some time, instead of reading um, what Shinran said, read what Shinran told us to look at, which was the larger sutra. And so he spent time with the larger sutra, and he reports it as a rebirth, that he actually, from reading the larger sutra through Shinran's view, he experienced a sense of rebirth. And um, so what he wrote about the larger sutra kind of frames the way I look at it, that It is Shakyamuni telling us um, the story to engage us personally and to see our life in a way in a rebirth kind of mode to energize our life through the story of Dharmakara. So a lot of the things that it says in our book that we're reading, I might put in notes that um, reflect Akarasu's view. And as we did last time, when they mentioned about Shakyamuni's life, they actually took the material from the Larger Sutra. And so that first part of the Larger Sutra that they covered in the earlier material we went over, mostly in that chapter 5, comes from in the Larger Sutra. It begins with Shakyamuni looking out on the audience, and then it says each of the people in that audience went through the Bodhisattva practice. So, and I mentioned last time that most translations they'll start out with that line, uh, the whole crowd and each of them, and then go to the singular pronoun of he. You know, just one person. Instead of repeating each of them or all of them, we just want to say he. Whereas the one translation I read by Suzuki Hiroshi, who was a minister in Hawaii, he's now back in Japan. He kept the plural in all those sentences. They, or and it gives you that sense of it's all of us, not just these people in the particular audience, but the Shakyamuni is looking out on the whole world and seeing the Bodhisattva path in each being that he's encountering. And so it's really so the Hiroshi Sensei brought out the idea that yeah, it's really a description to let us know the Bodhisattva path is not just one special guy, but it's a path for all beings, and that's how Shakyamuni, and that's really how we should view all the beings in the world too, is also being on the Bodhisattva path with us, and we're all going on this path. So that's really the opening of the larger sutra to so Akarasu said it's a sutra where the Shakyamuni is not talking down to people like a school teacher to his pupil, but it's a sutra where he's feeling like he's in a room of, I guess you could say friends or just fellow travelers, that he's really speaking to the audience, recognizing that they are fellow travelers with him. So that's one point Akarasu wants to make about that beginning, that to see it as, because later when they talk about the Buddhas contemplating each other, that refers to that beginning opening scene, that the Buddhas he's talking about, or that Ananda asks them about, is really the people Shakyamuni is looking at. Those are the Buddhas he's contemplating. Um, so I mean, so again, that's from Akarasu's interpretation. So we're going to start on page 43, where they go into the larger sutra. Um, and so now we get into what they call the main text of the larger sutra after that beginning part, um, where Ananda is asking Shakyamuni, what's going on with your face now? Um, so they and then we call it the larger sutra, and the Japanese title is the Sutra of the Buddha of Eternal Life, the Muroju Butsu Kyo, but the what do you call it? The Sanskrit title is Sukhavativuha Sutra. So uh, this idea of talking about the Pure Land. Okay, so it opens on, it's on page 43 that Shakyamuni is talking to the crowd of people on Vulture Peak in Rajagriha. Um, and then Ananda makes him the question, saying, after seeing Shakyamuni's unusual appearance, and most of the teachers will say the same thing. Shakyamuni didn't change. Ananda changed. Shakyamuni didn't all of a sudden turn on a switch on his face and it lit up. It's Ananda in his own view. He suddenly sees the brilliance of Shakyamuni. All this time up until then, Ananda was a loyal listener of Shakyamuni, but uh, had not really been awakened to what Shakyamuni is, his essence of his awakening. So his awakening was there from the Bodhi tree time, but Ananda did not feel, experience, or perceive that until this particular incident. So at that time, the world honored one felt extreme delight, and his pleasure showed his gestures, his complexion, his eyes. His complexion was pure, shining, continent, sublime. And I think you both know we chant the Tambutsuge um, in all our temples, and of course Nishi calls it the Sambutsuge. It really both mean praise of the Buddha, and that's the opening line. Ko gen gi gi. Ko is the light, gen is the face, and gi gi is the majesty. So this is a phrase that keeps coming up in the larger sutra. Uh, this majestic face full of light, and I think I think Victor probably heard me talking about. Somebody pointed out to me that those gi gi has a mountain radical in the kanji, and it refers in Buddha's time what was majestic for everybody in his geographical area was the Himalaya mountains. I mean, they just look up, and I've had that feeling too when I go out west or something. All of a sudden, you see these, white cap mountains. It's quite, you feel this sense of majesty. Um, so that gi gi, it's the same character repeated twice, meaning not just majestic but super majestic. so so it has that, his face is shining so much, it's just like the snow-capped peaks of the Himalaya mountains. That's their definition of majest, majestic in those days of Buddha's time. So the Chinese try to capture that in that particular character that they use, that gi. So on page 44, now Ananda is opening with his question. I said, gee, I noticed your face is really bright and shiny today. And then that second paragraph on 44 is the 5 todays, is konnichi, today. So today, um, and he used the 5 epithets for the Buddha. The world honored one is in the sphere of the most rare Dharma. Today, the world hero is where Buddhas dwell. Today, the one who's the eye of the world is well established in the conduct that always follows those. Then today, the one who is preeminent in the world walks on the highest path. Today, the one honored by the gods practices is in full possession of the Buddha, of the virtues of the Tathagata. So the 5 times that he repeats the phrase today and uses a different epithet, you mean different phrase to uh, describe the Buddha. And also the 5 virtues. After each epithet, he describes a certain activity or quality of this that he sees in this shining face. Um, and so then Shakyamuni has to ask him, um, this is a great question, because he realized now that you're asking this question, now you are experiencing the awakening. Now you're perceiving that awakening that I experience. Um, so so in this paragraph, they said this is how the larger sutra begins, and that's kind of a mistake because we just talked about the beginning. Actual beginning is about the bodhisattva path, and now the real story, the main story begins. Not the real story, but the main story begins. So uh, that's how they should say the main story begins. Um, and now on, so right in the beginning of the Kyoshi show, Shinran talks about this particular passage in the larger sutra of Ananda seeing the shining face of the Buddha. And just as a nitpicky thing, um, Shinran quotes this master, and so that quote is on, let's see, is that the right one? Yeah, it's on CWS page 9. And CWS, actually, one of the good things about CWS, the Korean masters, they put their Romanized names in Korean romanization. So, if you're familiar with the different Asian language, you can recognize it's a Korean romanization, not a Japanese or Chinese romanization. Unfortunately, the older translations like Suzuki, um, they still spell out the monks' names in a either Chinese or Japanese romanizations. And then another nitpicky thing is you probably know Chinese has two systems of romanization. The older one was called the Wade Giles and or Giles, and then the newer one's called the Pinyin. And right now, for scholars, Pinyin is the standard. So I think what Wayne did here, he spelled out the guy's name in Pinyin, Jingxing, and in the Suzuki book, you can actually see um, it's spelled out in the old Chinese translation. And the trouble with the newer version of Suzuki's translation is they don't have the great notes that the older one has. And the older one has a note that says, that recognizes this person is Korean and he's a Korean monk. Whereas if you don't have that note and you just see that Chinese romanization, you just assume he's a Chinese monk. So that was one of the great things about CWS is, and I know Kenneth Tanaka has been one of those people pushing, recognizing the vast amount of Korean commentaries that Shinran was influenced by. That that's a big part of Jodo Shinshu, or the Pure Land tradition, is the development of commentaries in Korea. So if you look at CWS, you see his name spelled out in Korean uh, romanization. And so this master uh, makes comments on the five todays and the five virtues, and and expounds on what those different virtues are. Um, And then it says, he also said this makes him, by means of his miraculous power, not only is he different from others, but there's none that can compare with him in permanency, uh, which sounds kind of different than what we've been talking about. But I think Shiram put this in because he wants to make the point through this Korean master of how suddenly Ananda sees Shakyamuni so differently, that now he sees that here's a person who's experiencing enlightenment, experiencing awakening, and so he's not the guy that Ananda used to see. He's not just another person lost in delusion that Ananda was used to seeing him as. So so this Korean master is just elaborating on those five todays, the five virtues of the what Ananda is saying. And then on the next page, 45, you can see the big typo. Thus we see, um, and this comes from, this is on CWS page 10. So we're still talking about the first chapter of Kyogo Shinsho, the Kyo Maki, the chapter on teaching. And that's it's a very short chapter, as you know, but that's what Shinran wants to start off in Kyogo Shisho. It said this is all based on the larger sutra. This the larger, and just like Akarasu stated that for Shinran, the larger sutra made my experience make sense in a lot of ways. The way Haneda Sensei would say is Shinran was so shaken by Honen when he encountered Honen, and he couldn't quite put his finger on what is it about Honen that is so moving me, that is so making my whole life feel like it's turning around. And then when he looked at the larger sutra, he felt this is the experience I had. So in this sense, it's very clear in this teaching chapter, Shinran sees himself as Ananda and Honen is Shakyamuni, that Shinran sees in the larger sutra a parallel to his own experience, that he met this person that just swept him away with this demeanor of awakening, and so we could say Honen's face wasn't literally glowing, but there was something about his whole uh, person that just really overwhelmed Shinran, that really moved him, that really we use the word shaken or reverberate, that so Shinran wants to spend this first chapter in Kyogo Shinsho. And I tend to see Kyogo Shinsho as his defense of Honen, saying this is the sutra saying what our encounter with awakening is like. That we encounter just like Ananda waking up to Shakyamuni's shiny face. This is Shimon said this is true. This is how we encounter the Dharma through this meeting this someone experiencing this awakening. And as you probably heard, it doesn't have to be a real in-person person. It could be from a book or um, from what you hear secondhand even. But this encounter is supposed to be very uh, the way Shinran felt it from Honen, just very life shaking. And so that's why Shinran in his commentary said, "That's why I know this sutra is true because I experienced it. This is my experience." And so, of all the sutras, this one really pins down what I have experienced. Um, and so they don't in this book they don't actually come out and say that, but I think you're probably familiar with Shinran's stance that this is why the larger sutra to him is central because it reflects it really captures his own experience of meeting Honen. Okay, then the next part, and I as I mentioned last time, I'm not referring to Gomez's translation. I hope you can follow along in your own translation. If you want to citing for this is the book I've been using this one, but if you have the other book, the green cover book, that's fine too to follow along. So we're still in the beginning part of the sections uh, 3, 4, and 5 where they describe Ananda and Shakyamuni's dialogue. Um, so then um, the question that Ananda asks is, "What's going on? For your face to be shining like this, you must be contemplating the other Buddhas." And so to answer the question, or not to almost not answer the question, Shakyamuni then tells him the story of Dharmakara. So it's almost like he wants the audience to know this is not about me and my personal experience, but I'm putting it in a story form so that all of you can feel the universality of what I'm describing as my experience of awakening. And so in a lot of ways, I feel the larger sutra is Shakyamuni taking the time to really talk about what is awakening like. It's going past the Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, his initial sermon. He wants to really draw the audience in and let them know what I call it landscape of awakening is like. What's going on in his interior, this experience of enlightenment. So first of all, he has the 53 Buddhas, and that's an interesting section because it starts with the first Buddha named Dipankara, which is a torch. So in a way, that's kind of so here we're coming into the metaphoric language. The language of spirituality is not literal; it's always metaphoric. And so, um, when you want to talk about beginningless time, you start with something that's obviously symbolic, so the torch. So we know the light from the torch has been passed down to us, but somewhere in the beginningless past, there was this, someone started the torch, there was the torch. So Dipankara, and then from then went to the other 52 Buddhas, and they all have very interesting names. So if you take the time to read their names, but most of it does refer to light. It's like that torch is being passed on to each generation of teachers. Um, and so finally, and I think I heard some reference that the number 53 refers to the Garland Sutra, the Avantaksa Sutra. I think someone I've heard that there's a lot of elements of the larger sutra. I think Aaron Prophet would be someone that's more familiar with this stuff. That the larger sutra kind of distills elements from the other sutras, such as the Garland Sutra, the Kegon. Um, and so then Lokshravaraja is referred to with these different epithets, the Tathagata Arhat. Um, And the part I want to let's see, did they put this? Uh, so if you look at the different translations of his name, Lokeshwara Raja, in the Blue Book, they call him the king who reigns over the world freely. And I don't like that phrase reigns over, um, though usually that's what a king does, I guess. So Seiji Zaio or Locus is the world, Shrava I guess this freedom, and then Raja, of course, is king. That we see that all the time, Maharaja, on the Indian restaurants. um, but the king who is free in the world is the way I would literally translate it. That he's in this well, I was reading that book on the Black Buddhists. They said going through the world without boxes, without being in a box, without self-confining yourself. I thought that those are great phrases that the Black teachers were using, because especially in the Black American experience, there's so much that feeling of being pinned in by different people's, prejudices and expectations. So I think that really describes Lokeshwara Raja, the person who is kind of like a king in that he feels this complete sense of not just freedom, but um, I hate to say autonomy because we always talk about interconnection, but the sense of being on his own like a king would be strolling through the world with nobody telling them what to do because they're the ones that are in charge. They're the ones that are at the top. So that feeling of being a king that of freedom in the world. So this is so again, this is the language of spirituality. It's not real people, it's made up names. Names to describe the character. So I would say it's like Charles Dickens. He comes up with all these strange names, like when we hear Scrooge, we just know that means somebody who's kind of stingy. So Shakyamuni is making up these names. So here we go. Here's a name, Lokeshwara Raja. But in a way, this reflects Shakyamuni's own experience, that when he went out from the palace, he saw the beggar with a shining face. He saw someone who, even though he was very poor and asking for food, he still had that air of freedom. A person that was had this feeling of being freedom. So in a way, Buddha is describing his own encounter, that he thought as a person in the palace, he was at the top, but actually he saw a man in the crowd who was truly free, who was truly exuding the sense of freedom. Um, so even despite old age, sickness, and death, and poverty and everything else, this man had this air of freedom. So Shakyamuni's pulling out these names to reflect his own experience as well. So if you can meet that kind of person, meet that sort of feeling of complete freedom, then that is the encounter with the Dharma. Um, and so now they kind of summarize Dharmakara's vows. And so after meeting Lokeshwara Raja Buddha, Dharmakara, and so again, Dharmakara is another made up name that Dharma, is the teachings, but Arkara is a storehouse. So the Japanese pronunciation you probably heard is Hozo, but storehouse of the Dharma. It really refers to potential, right? A storehouse um, is the stuff is locked up. It's the potential, but it needs to get out to supply those who needs it. So Dharmarka in this character represents this potential that we all have to find that storehouse of the Dharma. Um, so here they're even saying without meeting Lokeshwara Raja, Dharmakara um, wouldn't have experienced it. And then they were actually saying without Dharmakara, Lokeshwara Raja's life would not have been fulfilled. It's an interesting comment, but in a way, after the 53 Buddhas, it's kind of saying that for Shakyamuni himself, that his fulfillment of his own life also entails passing it on. That hopefully to pass on what will help others find that same fulfillment. So to keep it to yourself is not a true fulfillment, but to pass it on, to make it public, is what is important. So I think that phrase is referring to that. Without Dharmakara, Lokeshwara Raja's life would not have been fulfilled. And then they go into what we know as Tambutsuge, praising the teacher's virtue. So on page um, 46, and I think you both know Tambutsuge. Of course, at our temple, we chant it all the time. That's the default chanting we do. Whereas at the other Higashi temple, it's Shoshinge is what they normally chant on Sundays. But Tambutsuge has two parts. The first part is the praising of the Buddha, the Dharmakara praising his teacher Lokeshwara Raja. Um, and the second part, and you can see where that switch comes, is now Dharmakara saying, "I want what you got. I want to get where you're at. I'm going to devote my life to trying to getting to this awakening experience that I can see that you have." And so this is his. So it's not merely praising the Buddha, but also resolving to follow this Buddha to find what he has. And I think this is what makes a part of Buddhism that um, I don't know. I think just this praise part, or you hear it a lot in Christianity. Just praising, 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 like praising Jesus. But I think other Christians say it's not enough just to praise Jesus, but to follow Jesus, to in imitation of Christ. I think that's a phrase they use. So here in Tambutsuge, you say the same thing. You don't just get stuck on praising, but you have to reflect on your own self, saying, well, it's not just that guy's so great and I'm just a bum, but how do I also experience that same awakening that the teacher has. um, so so you have to move from praising to this resolution for your own life, that you want your life, you want to have what that person have, you want to experience that freedom that that person has. And so this aspiration, and it doesn't just mean for myself, but Dharmakana realizes it means for all beings. So I'm going to set up my own pure land, so all beings can also share in this experience of awakening that I am seeking. So my seeking is not just for myself, but it's to establish a realm so all beings can come and also experience this awakening. And so that's Tambu together, the chanting that we do of this section of the sutra. Um, and I used in my introduction to Buddhism class, I always talk about Mahayana sutras have all these verses, and I always say it's like a Bollywood musical that after all this prose and prose and prose, all of a sudden there'll be these verses, like everybody's gonna get up and sing and dance to summarize the previous action. But so Tampus again, in a way, is like Dharmakara bursting out into song, saying, "Wow, I just experienced something great, and it's gonna move me on to the next journey of my life." So it's almost like, so I like to think of these verses that come up in sutras as songs, as the character getting up on their feet and doing a happy dance, or doing this dance of joy and singing out their heart about what they're going through. So you see that a lot in the Lotus Sutra too. A lot of the Mahayana sutras have these long verse sections. But if you think of it as like watching a musical and someone's bursting out into song and dance, that's kind of why I think the narrative style in Sanskrit was kind of like that. People just don't want to hear prose after prose after prose. Once in a while, you got to have some dance numbers in the show. So but here this Tambutsuge is going to lead to the 48 vows. But before we get to the 48 vows, as they say in page 46, um, he wants to know, concretely from his teacher, how do I do it? Now that I pledged to follow you, how get me started? Give me something to get me going on this project for myself. And this is the part where Akarasu's interpretation um, is so different from the normal translations. And I think Victor heard me talk about it in that class. It's also up in my blog. I talk about this. But for Akirasu, the line in the larger sutra is four characters, Nyoji Tochi, and where the teacher says to Lokeshwara Raja says to Dharmakara, you should know yourself. And period. That's how Akirasu interprets that line. Whereas most translations, like you see on this page, you yourself will know how to follow the practice and how to adorn a Buddha field. Most translations, Gomez and Inagaki, everybody translates the line as one whole sentence. You yourself should know the practices, blah blah. Whereas Akirasu says you should know yourself and know the practices to adorn a Buddha field. The way Akirasu splits up, and as you know, with Chinese, especially with Shinran reading the Chinese, there's no definite punctuations or indications of grammar. So that's why Shinran has a pretty free hand in interpreting a lot of Chinese texts. But this is one part where Akirasu reading the Chinese text um, in this way reflects pretty much as you know about Kyozawa, know yourself. Kyozawa says, what is the self? You know, what is our self? And Akirasu feels this is what the larger sutra is also saying to us. Know your the very important first thing in Buddhism is self-examination. Know yourself. You just can't go out and do all these Buddhist things and not look at yourself. You really have to seriously look at yourself. And so Akirasu takes that one phrase from the larger sutra as independent of the second phrase. It's not one whole sentence. It's you must know yourself first. And they use the word to, ataru, um, and it's not really first, like first in line, but it means should, like this idea. This is the most priority thing. This is the thing that should be done. So knowing yourself is the thing that should be done, um, as a priority over everything else, as the first priority in this path. So so this is a tradition I've inherited from Akirasu, who's also taking it from Kyozawa, that to read the larger sutra is to read this instruction from Lokeshwara Raja as the number first thing, the thing you really should do on this path, so as you start on this path, is look at yourself, really confront yourself realistically to and first Dharmakara says, I'm not sure what you're saying. You know, it sounds kind of vast when you're saying I should know the how to adorn a Buddha field. Um, and so Lokeshwara Raja shows him the various lands that says they're called the good and bad. And the way I interpret this phrase, and kind of, like I said, going from Akira's interpretation, is Lokeshwara Raja says, in looking at yourself, you're also seeing how do you look at the world? How are you looking at the world? Um, I think the speaker, and too bad Gary, you didn't join us over last weekend. The speaker from who came from China, Professor Zhang Wei, she talked about our self-centeredness, our graspingness. One is our attachment to the self, but the other is discrimination. Discrimination comes from our self-attachment. We want to think how we see things is the best way, and everybody else is wrong. You know, that was that George Carlin line, when you're out on the road, um, everybody's an asshole or something like that. you know, so but she said that's the characteristic of our Bombu self. If we're so attached to our self, our ego self, that we tend to discriminate or divide the world, judge the world as what benefits me, what I like versus what I don't like, what is getting in my way. We make those judgments all the time. So I think what Lokeshwara Raja is telling Dharmakara here is to look at yourself means to see how you are looking at the world, and especially this line, the good and the evil. Um, how are you judging good and evil? How are you judging beautiful and ugly? How are you judging what they say, coarse and refined? All these different um, binaries that most people see as they look at the world. So that's part of self-examination, not just looking at yourself saying, oh, what kind of person am I? But you find out what kind of person you are by looking at the world and seeing where your judgment is going, seeing how you're seeing, dividing things up into good and bad, how you're doing, how even your most mundane experience, how you're judging them as, oh, this is nice and this is not so nice. But these are ways, Lokeshwara Raj is telling Dharma, these are ways to know yourself by seeing, by looking out on the world. So it's not, self-examination doesn't just mean looking inward, but it means when you look outward, what's going on inside that makes you see the world in these binaries all the time, or different scales of priority, or what's good, what's nicer and what's not so nice. So um so every time I talk about the sutra, I was saying it's like, look at yourself and look at the world. that's the that's the that's the continual self-examination. Look at yourself and look at how you're seeing the world. That is, and how you see the world also dictates how we act in the world. So, like Professor Zhang was saying, these people, especially the young people, got so hung up on Cultural Revolution to think they're right. Mao says this is the way to go, and everyone else that doesn't think that way, we have a right to beat them up, and beat them to death. Like, and that's what went on. That's what she witnessed, is this terrible violence going on. Um, and But for most of us, we don't see it to that point, but we do see how people get discriminated against because they're being judged, by people who think they don't deserve. So I think Dorothy Day has that thing about, to really, she's the Catholic person with a charity, but it's not to help those that we think deserve our help, but it's just to help people, not to question if they deserve it or not. So that's questioning. That's the part of the self-examination, how we look at others, and how we treat them, and how we talk to them, how we interact with them. So I'm giving you kind of, like I said, my Akirashi spiel. This is not directly in the text, but I think this is the part of the larger sutra that really turns, um, I guess they say, turn the key for me. That going from this praise of the Buddha, and then teacher telling you what you need to do. Is this self-examination. Um, and so he goes into uh, the vows of the great compassion, which is uh, 48 vows. Let me see here. So, uh, so the larger sutra has two sections, and there's the first half and the second half. And I have to say, I tell people the first section I'm very familiar with. I've gone over it with different teachers at different times, including at Otani University. But the second section, the only part that I really, especially with Dr. Nair, um, looked at is the beginning part of the second section, which is called the fulfillment passage. The rest of it, they kind of, go into a little bit, but just so you know, there's a first section, second section. What it is, in the old days, they put everything on scrolls, but you can only wrap so many much paper around a stick. So a long sutra, like the larger sutra, has to be on two scrolls. So that's why they actually use the word, wrap maki, like sushi, maki sushi. They use the word maki, to mean the first row and the second row. So when they talk about the two sections of the sutra. So the larger sutra is long enough to have two scrolls needed. So the first scroll is pretty much what we're going over now, the story of Dharmarkara. And then so going back to 47, um, and there's a whole bunch of, the 48 vows is they're all very interesting, so you could read a lot of commentary from different teachers on that. But the first line on the top of the page 47, that after listening to Lokeshwara Raja's teacher, Dharmarkara made the unsurpassably great vow of universal deliverance. And this comes from Shoshinge. Oh yeah, I wrote it. Choho Keu Dai Seigan. And you probably already know Shoshinge the beginning of Shoshinge is the larger sutra. Is Shinran giving his synopsis of the larger sutra. So they're in the, and that's on CWS 69 if you want to see the CWS translation. What Wayne is doing here in most of this book is referring to Suzuki's Kyoyo Shinsho, because being a Higashi publication, you should reference Higashi publications. So that's why he mainly references Suzuki's translation while he when he can. Um, so here, Dharmarka makes this great vow of universal deliverance, of vows that would include everyone. And I always say about the 48 vows, the same framework about discrimination, that the vows are reflect our own struggle with discrimination, how easily we put people in a lower ranking because of different aspects we see of them. I mean, skin color, clothes, disabilities, and then gender, even, that even comes out in the 48 vows. All these different categories, we tend to judge people in a very prejudicial way, and so the vows kind of reflect our own prejudices, how we need to get past those prejudices and see all beings as worthy, seeing all beings as deserving, not using any kind of criteria to exclude anyone. So that's kind of the way I tell people to read the 48 vows in that sense. Um, and then they mention in the second paragraph that this of the different translations, there's different number of vowels. Um, I think I read the Mueller uh, translation of the Sanskrit when I was first starting out at Otani. I think he had like 47 vowels, and there's no 18th vowel. There's no wording of what we know call the 18th vowel. And say what? And I'm like, how come there's no Hongan in this English translation that Mueller did? But then I realized in Sanskrit, what the Chinese people, by the time stuff got to China, a lot was lost. A lot is, like the game of telephone. People try to transcribe things. People try to put piece fragments together. They weren't able to, in whole, bring all the Sanskrit stuff to China through Central Asia. There's a lot of loss and uh, problems in translation or transmission going on. So what Mueller worked with was probably a pieced together version from Sanskrit, and not the one that was the basis for the Chinese translation we now know as the larger sutra. So, but that was a shock. Yeah, there's none of the vowels had the wording of Hongan in there of the 18th vowel. I said, "Wow, what happened?" But now I realize that's Buddhist transmission. Things get lost, things get added. And what the Sanskrit that exists today is probably a far cry than what the Chinese translators used. They probably had access to some texts that did not survive to today. Um, and so, in the different versions of the larger sutra, different translations, they have names for them. There's different numbers of vowels, and there is a guy at the IASBS conference who's got this ongoing project of looking at all these different versions and trying to correlate all the different vowels. So um, it's so 48. Just don't take that as a solid number. They're saying it's the translations vary as to the kind of vowels there are. But we get to the 18th vowel, which they say Honen regarded as the king of vowels, not just a hongan, but an o hongan, meaning a big, it's a big original vowel, big main vowel. And the rest of the vowels are vowels to be adorned. And then they go into Kaneko Dai in his categorizing, and the next slide is despite Kaneko's interpretation. I thought, well, I have to go through talk about Kaneko, and then they say, well, despite what he did. um, but there's a lot of commentary, and I'm very grateful to Kaneko because he really went out of his way to systematize a lot of Jodo Shinshu to help us students get through it. So I wouldn't have my teachers teach the way they did if they didn't have Kaneko's guidance and from all his writing. And a lot of my teachers were actually direct students of Kaneko. One of them in particular was Hataya Sensei that I learned Kyogo Shinjo from. He was a direct student of Kaneko. So Kaneko is trying to help us, make sense of categorize some of these vowels, why they're in a certain order or bunched together in a certain way. Um, but all of these are about compassion, I guess, as they really say. That's really the base of all these vowels. And compassion here means to include all beings. I mean, we in English we keep thinking compassion means to be feel sorry, but real meaning of compassion means with feeling. You know, come meaning with, and passion meaning feeling. And in the ancient Christian says passion meant suffering. So to be together with all beings in their suffering, that's compassion. So the the basis for all the vows is dharmakara's relating to include all beings, who are to to be one with their suffering, to be one with their struggles, to be one with their striving. um, so this is the basis of all his vows, to break down all those barriers in his own mind, through his self-examination that keep him from seeing himself as one with all other beings. He's got to work on all of that. So here, let's see, yeah. So this last paragraph in the section. So Shinran says this is the main theme of the sutra, which is the Hongan, and the Hongan substance of the Hongan is Nembutsu, the Buddha's name, and that's on CWS page 7. It's the very beginning of the teaching of chapter and teaching. And so Wayne, in using Suzuki's translation consistently, he has to say, instead of prayer, say vow. And as you know, the story with Suzuki, he wanted the word prayer because he felt it captured the emotional sense, the passionate sense of the vows. And Suzuki, even though he studied in America, he didn't have that, like most of us have had being in our culture, that indoctrination in how Christian, or the connotation of Christian words. So when Suzuki kept saying prayer, everybody else was going, "No, no, you can't, you can't say that." So that's why um, Wayne keeps saying substitute vow for prayer. But I understand a lot of Suzuki's feeling though. He thought vow sounds kind of dry. It sounds too formal, or structural or something. And they thought prayer is captured more that emotional sense, that deep down feeling of Dharmakara wanting to see himself as one with everyone suffering. So, and if you know some really sincere Christians, their prayer is that way. They do pray not just for particular people they know, but they are really praying for all the beings, all the suffering that's going on. So prayer could be seen, you can understand Suzuki's reasoning, I guess. It's just that the particular word set off a lot of discomfort for Buddhists, especially if they're converts, to see that word prayer used in translation. So this true intent of the larger sutra is this this whole vow, this whole aspiration to include all beings. So let's see, we got more. If I gotta get through the next section or not. Yeah, I think because this fulfillment section is a little bit shifting the gears, maybe I'll save that for next time. But it's just interesting that the first part of the larger sutra is putting out Dharmarka's story, the vows, this aspiration that he has. I think you know the word vow, gan. The Chinese character in Japanese is pronounced nagai. So when you go to Japan, you go onegai shimasu. Please do this for me. Every time I go to the store, it's like onegai shimasu. I need help, or I need, please get that thing off the top shelf for me, onegai. So this feeling of wanting something, of really so Bao is kind of dry. I could see Suzuki's reasoning for that. It's kind of very deeply felt feeling of, so aspiration is a word that Dr. Neda and Reverend Saito used a lot. Instead of for Hongan, innermost aspiration, they would use that word. Hon is a word, a tricky word too. It's the character tree, but with a line at the bottom, meaning the root. So it really refers to the root of things. So the root of, um, or sometimes we say the original or the primal thing. So, and how that word came to be the word for book, I don't know. I thought that's kind of interesting. They use that same word for books. But in this case, for the sutra, the Chinese felt that that word meant something very deep, primal, originally innate, I guess. And that's why Dr. Ned and Reverend Saito came up with the translation innermost, that it refers to something deep, deep, deep inside. Uh, and maybe just to close out this hour, there's a story that Taites Unos tells when he goes to different temples to talk. Because most temples, as you know, they have a Dharma school section of the service. A lot of, maybe not every week, but he happened to come on a day we asked him to do a Dharma school talk before his regular talk because the kids are dismissed before his regular talk. So anyhow, he I guess he does this all the time. He said to tell the kids, "Where's Amida? Where is Amida Buddha?" And he says the kids will give him all kind of answers. They'll point to the statue, of course, on the altar, or he said one time they pointed to the minister at the temple. There's Anita, you know, and or they'll point up to the sky or something. He said they'll point all different directions. Point to where's Amida, and he says no, point here. It's deep, 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 deep. He could just get deep, deep, deep. It's deep inside you. That's where Amida is. So so that's one way to think of Honga. Deep, 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 way, way deep in there. It's in there. Um and sometimes I feel like I wonder if that's really true. I do have my days of doubts, especially look at some of the horrible behavior of people on this planet. But I have to be like Shinran and know that the sutras are coming to us telling, no, there is this deep, deep, deep wish in all of us. There is this deep wish. And we have the testimony of generations and generations of people to to say this is true. There is this deep aspiration in all beings, this universal deliverance or liberation, as you might want to call it. Um, so I think that's why Sina so felt the larger sutra is his basic text. It's really the one that makes sense of what he experienced from Honen. And I think, but for both of you and then Greg who'll be listening to this recording, that it should be, it must be true for your lives too. You know, there's a lot of stuff floating around in the philosophy of religion and stuff, but yet there's something in Jodo Shinshu that's calling to us about something very universal, very basic, that we need to tap into. And there are people who have experienced that, and we need to listen to them. Just like Ananda's listening to Shakyamuni, like Shinran's listening to Honen. And we are at the feet of Shinran, listening to what that is. Okay, so at this point, yeah, I'll turn the and so next week we're gonna have to finish up, try to finish up the larger sutra and maybe go into the meditation and Amida sutra, which shouldn't take too much time. But I really feel it's important to do the topics of the larger sutra, especially next time to do the fulfillment passage. And also, before I do the turn off the recording, is there a particular time that's good to meet next time? I just thought 2 weeks from now would be okay. Um, so let me check my calendar. Um,
What is the date? What
the
is the date?
21st, the 21st or the 28th. Um, I would.
The 21st would not be good for me.
Okay.
Nakura Sensei is here at my
Oh,
house
okay.
on
Okay.
that day.
Would the 28th work for you?
That works for me. Yes.
Okay, if Victor works for you, okay?
Yeah,
Okay,
that works.
so we'll meet on the 28th at the usual time then. And Victor will send out an
Yeah.
email to remind us all. Okay, so I'm going to turn off the recording. We can get going.